Something very instructive about a bloke who wants to return to Parliament. Tony Windsor. Now, we all know Tony Windsor as the bloke who helped install the Gillard government that helped run the country into the ground for 3 years, but he's a bloke who wants to knock off Barnaby Joyce at the coming election. He's a guy who has come back almost for that sole purpose, to put one right through the middle of the Nationals, a party of which he was a member generations ago and he's fought against ever since. This guy, of course, is a man who presents very well on television, and he's a guy who quite often on the ABC is held up as sort of being, you know, a lovable country lad. But in the past couple of days, something has been exposed about Tony Windsor. And it's not about how desperate he wants to win the election, it's about how low he is willing to stoop to do it. This was something that was on Channel 2 earlier this week on Four Corners. Have a look.
Kerry Schofield's known Tony Windsor since high school and supported him on all his election campaigns. That friendship ended on the 7th of September 2010, the day Tony Windsor backed the minority Labor government of Julia Gillard.
It's the government that he put into power that put this country into the debt that it's in, and that's, we've got grandchildren, we've got 3 grandchildren. I worry about them.
Kerry Schofield and Tony Windsor go back a long way. In fact, it goes back to when they were 13 years old, when both of them were at a boarding school. One of them was the school prefect a couple of years ahead, and the younger one was Tony Windsor. Ever since they were mates, and ever since he got involved in politics, Mr Schofield backed Tony Windsor all the way. All the way until his decision in 2010. So when Mr Schofield turned up on Channel 2, this is what Tony Windsor said about the man willing to say that the sun doesn't shine out of this bloke's backside.
Oh, well, I think the character that was there last night, there's a lot of other reasons for that as well, which I won't get into, but the Vietnam War does funny things to people, and anyway, that's another story.
Yeah, you heard that right. There was a lot of trouble to do with the Vietnam War. Essentially, Tony Windsor took to a national platform one of the darkest tales of Kerry Schofield's life. It wasn't just that Kerry Schofield, of course, had served in Vietnam, but he had post-traumatic stress disorder. It wasn't until 20 years after he returned from that war that he suffered a colossal breakdown. One where he lent on friends like Tony Windsor for support. Now, as best as we know, Mr Schofield has not spoken about this horrible time in his life, and certainly hasn't taken out any national advertising to say that he went through that awful time in his life. The only reason you know about Mr Schofield's mental health history is because Tony Windsor brought it up. Because Mr Schofield dared turn on Tony Windsor. But what is interesting to note in all of this is that if you can follow your timelines nice and easily, Mr Schofield supported Mr Windsor up until 2010. His breakdown came and went well before 2010. He had supported Tony Windsor all the way on either side of his illness. And Tony Windsor's response to a friend who confided and lent on him since he was 13 years old was to throw him under the bus on national radio. The Australian newspaper picked it up today. Ray Hadley did a sensational interview today with Mr Schofield, who talks about the difficulties that he had and how embarrassing it is that his former friend decided to out him nationally for, God forbid, having post-traumatic stress disorder.
I had a very serious breakdown, and it was only through support of family, doctors and staff of Veterans Affairs. You know, they all got me through it. It took a while. My breakdown was so serious they didn't think I'd ever come out of it, hospital staff, but I did with the support that I had.
So I don't know where this guy, Tony Windsor, gets off.
And here's where the nasty stuff kicks in. This is what Tony Windsor said today when he started to be confronted about why did you out Mr Schofield for his mental health past. Have a listen to this for some slippery work.
I didn't mention any names in the interview that's come into question. People have construed that it's a certain individual, and I've had a lot to do with that man and his family and children. I've helped his children over the years, know the family very well.
I didn't mention any names. Other people have just worked this out. Mr. Windsor, do you honestly believe that the people of New England are so stupid that they think that there are hundreds of people who served in the Vietnam War who happen to talk to Four Corners, who happen to be critical of you? Later in the day, after pretending that he wasn't talking about Mr. Schofield, he released this statement. Mr. Windsor has called Mr. Schofield and apologised for his choice of words on Radio National Breakfast yesterday morning. They were an unfortunate choice of words, and I apologise for that unreservedly. I've been a great supporter of Mr. Schofield and his family for many years, and it wasn't my intention to cause him distress or personal offence. Bullshit, Tony. You thought you could get away with kneecapping a bloke just because he doesn't support you anymore. A bloke who you blamed his post-traumatic stress disorder on why he doesn't support you anymore. The only problem is he did support you before, during and after that mental health episode. In a week when we have talked uphill and down dale with great aggravation about the comments of Eddie Maguire, do you think there could be just a little bit of outrage for a person who wants to be a politician in this country, who was willing to throw someone's mental health out for public consumption just because they disagree with him? Oh, and here's the fun bit at the end. Tony Windsor says that he has contacted Mr. Schofield and has apologised. Now, I understand that, yes, he has left a voicemail on Mr. Schofield's phone. He hasn't spoken to him, and in that voicemail, he makes no suggestion of meeting him up for a beer to sort it out. The statement that he released saying that he had reached out to Mr. Schofield was released about 15 minutes later.